All right. So my name's Diane, and today I'll be talking to you about polyamory. So who amongst you remembers the Clinton scandal? Anyone? Right? Of course you do. When that story first broke, journalists were salivating. All anyone could talk about for weeks was Clinton's wrinkly old penis and where it had wandered into. Then there's Ashton Kutcher, Tiger Woods, Meg Ryan, and my personal hero, Arnie Schwarzenegger, have all cheated. Infidelity is ubiquitous. Out of all of us here in the room, half of us have either cheated or been cheated on. And I'm part of that statistic on both sides. But what I find really baffling about cheating is the way we approach these people, the sort of sanctimonious mudslinging. We crucify the individuals and don't question the system. Now look, a little caveat. I'm not here to piss all over monogamy. Monogamy is legitimate, it can be really beautiful. Some people go through their lives monogamous, and that's great. But what I'm trying to say is that some of us are in monogamous relationships, even though we're not wired that way. I should know. I was one of them. So I met Jack at a wedding back in Canada, and we instantly fell in love. And I moved all the way to dreary old England to be with him. And on paper, everything was great. He was smart, funny, successful, a little bit sexy. And then I cheated on him. Yeah, right? I still loved him. I still wanted to be with him. And yet I did this crazy thing. And so I found myself in dreary old England, alone and confused, and just thinking, are relationships and love a futile enterprise? I remember thinking of a Nick Hornby quote and sort of imploring to Cupid on high. Am I going to jump from rock to rock for the rest of my life until there are no rocks left? And then I started talking to my friend Ashley. And she told me about Jeff, her lover, her live-in partner, and the father of her child, and her other boyfriend, Greg, and Jeff's other girlfriend, Sally, and wait, what? You can't do that, I thought. I've never seen this on a rom-com starring Ryan Gosling, ever. And then she put the word in my mouth. Polyamory. And I swished it around a little bit. And it felt strange and scary, and I knew it was taboo. But it felt right. For the first time, I felt that the way I approached relationships finally had a name. So look at me now. I'm here at Sexpo talking about it. So how does this whole thing work? Well, I've got diagrams with amusing pop culture references. So this is pretty common in polyamory. Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man represent a primary relationship, with both people having the ability to have secondary relationships. There is some contention with this. Some poly people think there shouldn't be hierarchies in relationships. But for people that are first entering polyamory, this is comfortable and works for them. Then there is the V, where you've got someone with two partners not related. They're the hinge in the middle. You've got triads and quads. And then you've got these, polycules. Again, with the pop culture references, because I'm a total dork. These can be really complicated, but they can also be very fun and very supportive. Then you've got people like me. I consider myself a solo polyamorist, which means I want to live alone and have a lot of freedom and autonomy, and yet I still want to cultivate meaningful relationships. And then you've got people who abolish all hierarchies and labels, and they're called, get this, relationship anarchists, which sounds totally badass. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking, especially you, orgies. Big, hot, sinewy masses of genitals just mashing together. And sure, some poly people do approach sexuality with this sort of reckless abandon, but that's not what this is about. This is about a lot more than just sex. It can just be a massive bonus. So, what do you need to make polyamory work and not to totally suck at it? Well, you need to realize that love isn't a finite resource. We can love multiple family members or siblings or children So why not relationships? Why is it that these sorts of relationships get the quota? Like, oh, no, you love someone that way. If you love someone else that way as well, you better forget those feelings, push them down, and also feel super guilty about it. I don't think love works like that. I feel like with love, the more you give, the more you get, a sort of rainbow, unicorn-laden feedback loop. And I've seen this in my own life. I remember I was with someone named John, and I was falling in love with someone named Mark. And I had a lot of what we call NRE, or new relationship energy. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's where they're all you can think about, and you're going insane, and everything's rainbows and gumdrops. And I remember that it didn't necessarily take away from my relationship with John. It's not like I took that energy away. Instead, it sort of energized it. I remember that was how I used to feel about him, and everything just sort of seemed a bit lighter. The other thing you need, and this is a pretty obvious one, is communication. And I am talking some serious communication. In all the articles I read about polyamory, it says that polyamorous communicate to death. And it's true. You know how sometimes you don't say something even though you know you should because you're worried it might hurt someone else's feelings? Well, in polyamory, you have to honor communication in all its forms. I mean, how many of us, after we get on bended knee and ask for a hand in marriage, then have a conversation? Is monogamy going to work for us long term? What are our authentic desires, needs, and wants? Are they realistic? And most importantly, are they compatible? I remember when I used to work as a stripper and being a little bit of a sadist, I used to say to these young bachelors, these husbands-to-be, take a good look. It's the last one you're ever going to see. And I would watch the blood drain from their faces. No, I would think they have not had that chat. In polyamory, you've got to really have an emotional intelligence. You've got to be able to know what you want and then have the sort of gusto to ask for it. Next, you need to have boundaries. But these are a different sort of boundary. These aren't the ones that are assumed, but are instead the ones that you decide as a couple or pod or triad or whatever. They're your own lines that you draw in the sand. And like lines drawn in the sand, they can move and be changed when people change or situations change or emotions change. So I met Andrew on a night out, and as things usually do with me, the conversation turned to relationships. And he said to me, Diane, look, I've got a beautiful wife and a lovely baby boy. But we realized early on in our relationship that we had different sexual needs and desires. So we made an agreement. Whenever I went down to Melbourne for business, as long as I was safe, I was free to do what I wanted. When I came back, she could ask, or not, what I'd gotten up to. And I would tell her with 100% honesty. Now, who am I to say that's not a real relationship? They've got all the other tenets, the honesty and the communication. Hell, they're raising a kid together. I can't imagine what kind of effort that takes. And yet, if he wants to get his rocks away, 1 or 2 times every few months, who am I to say that's not okay? Those are the boundaries that work for them. Next, and this is my favorite, is compersion. Now, this is a word a lot of you probably haven't heard before, but that's okay because polyamorous made it up. But not me, it was about 40 years ago. So what compersion is, it's finding joy in someone else's joy. It's as if my partner, someone I really cared about, came up and said to me, hey Diane, listen, I had this great date with Sam last night. We were talking about the dual wave particle theory and how she loves macrame, and you know that's my jam. So we went back to her place and the sex was explosive. She did this move where she took her leg, and then I go, and I mean it when I say, that sounds fantastic. Tell me more. By the way, the butter churner is also one of my favorites. It's finding joy in someone else's joy, and I find this way of approaching relationships is really profound. I love deeper than I ever thought possible. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Hold on, Diane. I just thought of my significant other doing the butter churner with someone else, and I feel like I might throw up. And you know what? That's normal. In fact, it's pretty common. When I work with clients, jealousy comes up time and time again. But luckily, we're adults who aren't slaves to our emotions. And I usually find as we dig below the sort of knee-jerk emotion that jealousy is, it comes from other things. Things like insecurity, fear of abandonment, or this idea that happiness comes from external forces, especially ones you can't control, like what someone else does or feels. It also comes from the stories that we tell ourselves. I remember, again, with John and Mark, when I was falling in love with Mark, I talked about him all the time. I put him on a pedestal, and John was getting a little frustrated. He sort of pictured Mark as this Adonis, and things were getting tense around the house. Whenever I went out, there'd be arguments. So what did I do? Well, I introduced them to each other. And John realized that Mark wasn't some demigod sent down from the heavens to better please his girlfriend. He was just a regular guy. And they got on. They actually had more in common than just me. Jealousy can feel really icky sometimes, but it can be overcome. And I feel that the benefits of polyamory are worth sort of fighting through them. Next, you need a community. And I love the poly community. We're from all walks of life, but we're very inclusive and open-minded. A good place to start is PolyVic here in Melbourne. They have over 1,000 members, and they meet every month. They talk about things like consent and kink, so not your usual weekly conversations, I bet. I think it's also really important when you're going through this to find a community, somewhere where you can reach out and get a helping hand back, and someone who's gone through the same things that you have. They can really kind of bring you up. As great as polyamory has been, and the fact that I've been able to envelop myself in loving relationships, what I find more profound is the way I now approach relationships. I used to buy into this whole Jerry Maguire, you complete me crap. I bought into this idea that I wasn't whole. And I kind of think of it like a container. We're given this thought that you need this full to be whole. And so you find someone and you just stuff them in out of desperation. And they might not fit all the nooks and crannies. They might not be totally emotionally available or sexually compatible, or maybe they're just like a little bit racist. But you stuff them in anyways. And then meanwhile, your brains get flooded with chemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin that make you temporarily insane. But then 4 months to 4 years later, those chemicals dissipate and the cracks start to show. And this is usually when we break up, or we cheat, or worst of all, we compromise in ways we're not actually willing to, and in turn lose ourselves. Now, I know at this point I'm starting to sound like a massive cynic, but something really profound happened when I stopped looking for this ideal, and that is that I found it in myself. Oops, I almost dropped my water bottle there. I find I'm not clinging on with both hands, but let things happen really organically. I'm not jumping from rock to rock anymore. If I find a rock of fancy, well, I might stay, but if not, I might keep swimming. I think of relationships now kind of like a sand mandala, these intricate structures that are painstakingly made with colored sand, but then are easily blown away by a change in the wind. Or in the case of relationships, a change of heart, or a change of a person, or a change of situation. I remember I fell in love with someone, very foolishly, before I was coming to Australia. Now, if love was a game that was supposed to be played, I would never have started. I wouldn't have, climbed the relationship ladder and unlocked the relationship achievement. Game over. But I did. And we had this great relationship. I learned a lot about myself and about the things he was into. And when I moved to Australia, I watched the sand blow away. And yeah, I was sad, but I more so felt blessed that I was able to share my life with someone and that I had this wonderful experience. I also want you to know that polyamory isn't that uncommon. If you're looking at the US, about 500,000 people claim to be engaging in some sort of ethical non-monogamy. As far as Australia is concerned, the statistics aren't really there yet, and there's a few reasons for this. First of all, some people who engage in this sort of lifestyle either don't know or don't care what it's called. Other people underreport because of the stigma. Can you blame them? A lot of people think this is about sort of going after your carnal desires recklessly or emotional deadness. It's sort of the reason I'm here. And there can also be legal ramifications, especially if there's young kids involved. But as we go on, we're finding that psychologists and the media are starting to really take hold of this. And we're finding the data that is coming in is mainly positive. Apparently, breaking down relationship models isn't breaking down the fabric of society. And children in these sort of multi-parent relationships are actually quite well adjusted. They've got more support and more perspectives. The main complaint these children have is that they don't get away with as much. There's too many eyes. And if they do fabricate a story, they better make sure it's a good one, because they're going to have to tell it again and again, and possibly again and again. Polyamory is something that really is growing. And I can almost bet that some of you open-minded sexpo people are already doing something like this, or know someone who is, or know someone but don't know they're doing this. Or you could be what Dan Savage calls monogamish, which means you're basically monogamous, but maybe not all the time, like every third Friday of the month sort of thing. I find the world really frustrating sometimes. I see these single-minded quests for profit that leave everything, the lower classes, the environment, and human progression in their wake. But I take solace in the fact that we're a generation that is starting to question how it's always been. We're the Uber and the Tesla generation looking for innovative ways to take things out of assumption and bring them to places where they really benefit us. If there's one thing I want you to take out of this talk, it's that everything deserves your criticism and scrutiny, even relationships. If this polyamory thing sounds like your bag, great. There are tons of resources out there. There are books and blogs and vlogs, and there are people like me, coaches. And if you're thinking after this, you know what, no, Diane, monogamy is good for me, well, that's great too. But maybe you can take these tenets of polyamory, the open-mindedness, the honesty, the communication, and bring them to your own great monogamous relationships. I can really thank polyamory for who I am today. I am more authentic and loving and content than I ever thought possible. To me, this isn't just about a bunch of people doing stuff. It's a real mindset and a real lifestyle. Lastly, I want to thank you guys all for coming. I'm going through this crazy journey, and I'm scared shitless. So it means a lot that you've just come and sat down and listened to me for 20 minutes. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your sexpo.